It's episode 95 of In the Front Row with Mike Vaccaro. Today's guest, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Bob Kendrick. You like passion, you like someone who loves their job. Bob Kendrick is the embodiment of that as he tells us about his journey to becoming the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum back in 2011, and also talks about the leagues, the players that have made it so special, and some of what he's doing right now. As he says, he's begging for contributions to the current museum and trying to expand and have a new museum as well. Great stories, great energy, outstanding passion from Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, our guest in episode 95 of In the Front Row with Mike Vaccaro. Well, Bob, first of all, thanks for joining us here today. I'm sure you're a busy man and you've got a lot of stuff going on, and you just have the Rickwood game. Are you on the road a lot during this baseball season?
Yeah, no, it's been kind of a whirlwind summer to this point, a lot of travel, but it's all good. I think everything that, I've been engaged in and involved with has been something that has been kind of a milestone or something monumental. And so the interest in Negro Leagues baseball history and the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is just skyrocketing at this point, and I couldn't be more thrilled about it.
We're going to dive into the museum, but I want to start with you. You're a Georgia guy, and your first time, I guess, in Missouri was when you went to school, and you went to school to a basketball scholarship. So how does a basketball guy become such a big figure on the baseball field?
Yeah, no, it's a kind of an interesting story in its own right. I chased a basketball from Crawfordville, Georgia. Crawfordville, Georgia is east of Atlanta, west of Augusta, all of 500 people. And I chased the basketball from Crawfordville, Georgia to Parkville, Missouri, where Park College was located, now Park University. How in the world they found me in Crawfordville, Georgia, and offered me a basketball scholarship, I will never know. But I came out to the Midwest, didn't know a soul, and I've been here ever since. And it's kind of poetic that now I make my living in baseball, albeit baseball history.
And I guess, did you begin in media? You were a newspaper writer during once you graduated?
Yeah, I got a degree in communications art with an emphasis in broadcast communication and journalism. And of course, like when you finish school, like most of us do, you're just trying to find a job. And my first job was at the Kansas City Star. But Mike, I was working in the composing room of the Kansas City Star, which is hilarious to think now because everybody, I guess I've earned a reputation of being a fairly decent dresser. But when I was working in the composing room, I was wearing a denim apron. Yeah, I was wearing a denim apron with a pica pole and an X-Acto knife, helping put the newspaper together. Working with some amazing editors though at the newspaper, and got an inside look at the production aspect of the newspaper industry. And then eventually I moved over to the promotions department, which functioned as its in-house advertising agency. And that is when I got introduced to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in 1993. I drew the assignment of promoting the museum's first ever traveling exhibition, an exhibition called Discover Greatness. It is still touring the country 31 years later. And that was my introduction to the museum. And as I tell people, the moment that I walked into what was then a one room office in 1993, that I literally stepped into what would become my passion. I fell in love with the museum, and I fell in love with those amazing athletes who made this history. And Mike, even more so as a baseball fan, I quickly realized how little I knew about the history of this game, particularly as it related to the history of this country. And I guess you could say that I just became enamored in it, engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And man, I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way I felt about it. And then I started to meet the players, and one particular player, as you well know, my dear friend, the legendary John Jordan Buck O'Neill. And as I oftentimes say, once you're bitten by the buck bug, oh man, it's a wrap. You just want to be on his team. There's no antidote for it. You just soaked it, sucked in, and you just want to be on his team. And I had no idea that it was going to turn into a career. And one of the most gratifying things I think I could have done either personally or professionally. And so my involvement with this museum now goes back for 31 years. The last 13 years, of course, as president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
And I know it's a passion of yours because every time I've ever seen you speak, you speak like this with such great passion. And you mentioned Buck O'Neill, kind of founded it in 1990. You came to the table in 1993. But what was it about him? What was he trying to accomplish? And now you see what he did accomplish with getting this museum going.
Oh, it was the charisma, the passion, the energy, the youthful exuberance. And when I met Buck for the very first time in 1993, it's still amazing to me that it took so long for our paths to cross. Kansas City's not that big. And and when you start talking about the inner circles of the African American community, even smaller, yet we had not met in any of our social circles. And when I met him for the first time, as I got involved with the museum as a volunteer, one of the first questions that I ever posed to Buck was, what motivated you to want to build a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum? And his answer was succinct, but also very poignant, so that we would be remembered.
Mm.
He did not want them to be forgotten, not for just what they gave the game of baseball, but more importantly, what they gave this country. And that's been the quest. That's been the mission ever since. And I guess you could say he passed the baton over to me. And as I oftentimes say, Buck was gallivanting across this country, man, preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of his museum to any and everybody who would listen. And I guess I'm hanging from the hem of his garment. I'm going along for the ride. And guess what? Now I get to preach the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of Buck O'Neill's museum to any and everyone who will listen. And what an honor for me it is to walk in his enormous shoes, because you can't feel his footsteps. You can't. You can't feel his shoes. But it's an honor to walk in his footsteps. And I'm not, a lot of people would I think give in to the weight of having Buck O'Neill's enormous shadow looming over you. I don't look at it that way. I look at it from the standpoint that his shadow looming over me protects me. Oh, he guides my footsteps. And I tell people, and I mean it sincerely, they think I'm playing, but I'm real. I talk to Buck almost every single day. Now, he doesn't always talk back to me, but I talk to Buck every day because the wisdom that he imparted, you call upon that when you have difficult decisions there to make. And I just feel that his spirit is still a very prevalent part of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And as long as I have anything to say about it, it will forever be a prevalent part of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Well, is there some way to make sure that you get it right and you continue to get
Of
it right
course.
and the message continues to be what you want it to be out there?
Of course. I am self motivated, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you that the spirit of Buck O'Neill still drives all of us.
Yeah.
We want him to be proud of what we're doing and how we've carried on and build upon what he started way back in 1990. So yeah, you feel that pressure to want to do it right. And again, pressure, I think you always want to have some of that. You can't rest on your laurels. In this business, there are no laurels. The your reward for doing something good is that you get to do it all over again. And that's the challenge that you face. But I'm okay with that. I love that. I think our team responds well to that as well. And I think we understand that not only are we doing this to carry on Buck's legacy, but the legacy of the nearly 3,000 plus men and women who called the Negro Leagues home. And that if we do it right, we will one day leave a legacy. And it's not often in this world, crazy world of ours, that you get to do that others will have an opportunity to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And hopefully, in the process, they'll remember us as well. But that is motivation enough to try and do this as best as we possibly can.
Well, you're certainly doing that. You started with marketing in 1998. 2011, you moved and became the president of the museum. So take us through kind of some of your responsibilities and roles. You said a little bit of historian, and you're kind of the face of the museum, if you will, right now. But what other roles and responsibilities come along with being the president?
Where there's a lot of those, that had that asterisk as other duties as necessary. Yeah, that asterisk plays a very prominent role. You do a little bit of everything, and that's okay. There's a great variety of what my day is like on any given day. I do a lot of this running my mouth, telling stories, and someone created a T-shirt in my honor. My good friend Victor Rojas, the son of the legendary Cookie Rojas,
Mhm.
created a T-shirt where he depicts me as the chief storytelling officer. And so I've kind of drawn that assignment after Buck passed away. And man, I love sharing these stories relative to the Negro Leagues. And these are stories that guys like Buck O'Neill and other former Negro Leaguers, many of them have passed on, that I had the opportunity to rub shoulders with, spend time with, and I get to share these stories that they shared with me. And I guess in doing so, it keeps them alive in my mind, in my heart. And that's what we want to do. My principal responsibility is raising money because I don't care how great a storyteller you are. I don't care how great an administrator you might be. If you can't raise any money, you're no good in this job. And so they got all these fancy terms. They call it development, they call it fundraising. I call it begging. That's what I do for a living, Mike. I beg for a living because I got to convince people to share their resources with us so that we can keep this museum afloat. But that's okay. As the song once said, I ain't too proud to beg, and I'm a cheerful beggar. But that's what I do for a living. But it's a very varied responsibility and role. But I enjoy it because of the variety of stuff that I get to do. And that's usually the case in a very small organization. You take on and you willingly take on whatever tasks are necessary to get the job done.
Well, I would think maybe that begging has gotten a little easier lately. Maybe. Again, it just seems like the Negro Leagues are getting more recognition. We mentioned the Rickwood game that was on Fox not too long ago. Recognition now in video games, MLB The Show, where the Negro League players are included in that. Has that all helped out in your what you call begging?
Oh man, it's been tremendous. The awareness, these milestones that many of that you just mentioned, these things really help make it a little bit easier for me to go knocking on doors. People now have a better understanding. See, when we first started this project, we were talking to people. We were asking for support from corporate partners and foundations who they didn't know the significance of the Negro Leagues. This is not your typical story where this story has been so tremendously documented and everybody just automatically understands the significance of this piece of history. So not only did you had to educate them and then convince them that this history deserved to be preserved and celebrated, and then encourage them to support it. So there was a process in place. Now we've had tremendous success, over these last 3 decades since our humble origins began, and more people are now gaining a better understanding, and I do believe in appreciation. But these things that you mentioned, the rolling of the stats of the Negro Leagues into the record books of Major League Baseball. That is historic. The game at Rickwood Field was monumental. One of the most memorable baseball events that I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and it was amazing. So the platform is getting larger and larger. We're gaining momentum in terms of creating a mainstream voice for the Negro Leagues. But the biggest thing that we may have ever done was a video game. The inclusion of the Negro Leagues in the video game MLB The Show, where we introduced the Negro Leagues in 2023, the first time ever in the biggest baseball video game in the world. And to partner with Sony and PlayStation and the San Diego studio that produces this game has been amazing because what has happened now, Mike, is that millions of young people and young adults, they're not only learning about the Negro Leagues, but man, they're falling in love with
Yeah.
the Negro Leagues. But you and I know this. What's not to love about the Negro Leagues? The Negro Leagues embodies the American spirit unlike any story in the annals of American history. It is everything that America prides itself in being, but it's not there yet. And as I remind folks, because it's not there yet, doesn't mean it's not the greatest country in the world. It just means that there's still work remaining to be done. but through the lens of these courageous and talented athletes, our visitors get an understanding, I think, and maybe a greater appreciation for the true value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's all wrapped up inside this story of these athletes who, when it's all said and done, they just wanted to play ball. So to put them in this video game, and I tell people all the time, how do you bring the Negro Leagues to life? You put them in a video game. And these kids are not only learning it, but as I mentioned, they're falling in love with these ball players. But if anyone deserved to be in a video game, it would have been the players from the Negro Leagues because they played the game, I guess you could say, video game esque.
Yeah.
The way that they played the game, the style in which they played the game.
And again, you said, you did some research, learned the stories, but was it having to learn the stories from the gentlemen themselves because there wasn't as much documentation about their time in the Negro Leagues?
Yeah, no, I mean, to get that firsthand accounts from those guys who lived it. I can share the stories, but I didn't live those stories. So when you walk through the museum with Buck O'Neill, you're not only seeing the museum, but you're hearing it from someone who was a part of it. And so to be around those guys, to try and absorb as much of this as I could and then share it. But thankfully, there's been so much work done in recent years around Negro Leagues. More films, more books. And I hope there's more to come because I keep pitching and I'm steady pitching a TV series for the Negro Leagues. And Mike, I think we're getting closer and closer to making this a reality. A dramatic TV series on the Negro Leagues has to happen because, as I tell people all the time, and my friend Buck O'Neill would say this, you don't have to fictionalize the story of the Negro Leagues to make it entertaining.
Right.
Just tell the real story. It's entertaining in its own right. These stories, man, are jumping off the walls here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We're just waiting for a great writer and somebody with a little seed money to make this thing happen. And as I always say, I sure hope they make old Bob executive producer, man. But no. But, fortunately, there's been so much more documentation. And even as we look at those stats being rolled into the history books of Major League Baseball, the record books of Major League Baseball, that is really largely due to what I call a dream team of Negro League historians and researchers who did monumental work to unearth and bring forth the quantitative data that was necessary to make this occur. And so I am thrilled that more people are taking interest. They're writing more pieces about the history of the Negro Leagues. And so now this information has become a lot more readily available. And of course, you've got a primary resource in the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum that gives everyone an opportunity to learn about this rich piece of history. And what I think is one of the most amazing stories in the annals of American history.
Who are some of the names that put a smile on your face? Obviously, you've got Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays, who we just lost, but you mentioned Buck O'Neill, Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, Cole Papa Bell. Who really, who are some of the stories that you love sharing?
Oh, and every one of those you mentioned, man, I love sharing them all the time. But one of my favorite players, and this is one that really kind of catches people by surprise because it's not a name that is a household name. See, when you talk about Satchel, you talk about Cool Papa, you talk about Josh Gibson, those are transcending names, even from the Negro Leagues. Most baseball fans have at least heard the names. Now, they may not know just how great those players really were, but you've likely heard the names because there's so much lore and legend surrounding those almost mythical like ball players. But for me, one of the eye openers for my visitors is when they come in and on the field of legends, they're standing there on this amazing baseball diamond that has these 10 life size statues of Negro League greats, and they're all cast in position as if they were playing a game. And standing at home plate hitting is the great Cuban ball player, Martin de Higo. His nickname was El Maestro, the master, because he could do it all. Played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. He is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries baseball halls of fame.
Wow.
He's in the Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Dominican, and in Cooperstown. And then in center field, you have another Hall of Famer, but again, he's not a household name, and that is the great Oscar Charleston, whom Buck O'Neill would say without hesitation, the greatest baseball player he ever saw. Now, he thought the late great Willie Mays to be the greatest major leaguer that he ever saw. And you know what? Most people concur because, as you know, Willie Mays could beat you every way in which you could be beaten. He could beat you with his bat, with his arm, with his legs, with his glove. And of course, Willie Mays' illustrious professional baseball career began as a 17-year-old patrolling center field for the Birmingham Black Barons. But Buck O'Neill believed the great Oscar Charleston to be the greatest baseball player he ever saw. Oscar Charleston was an early era Negro Leaguer who could do everything. The consummate five-tool guy. Hit for power, hit for average, could field, could run, could throw. In 1921, Oscar Charleston had one of the greatest seasons, not in black baseball history, but in baseball history as a member of the St. Louis Stars when he led the Negro Leagues in home runs, triples, doubles, stolen bases, and batting average in the same season. And if you were to ask the old timers in the Negro Leagues, they will tell you that they never saw a center fielder who could go back on a ball the way Charleston could, including Willie Mays. And the old timers in the Negro League say the closest thing to Oscar Charleston would have been Willie Mays. And that is absolutely frightening. And Buck says the great catch, and everybody's familiar with the catch. The great catch that Willie Mays makes there in the Polo Grounds during the World Series. And of course, the throw was actually better than the catch. Yeah, it really was. But because of the magnitude of the moment and because Mr. Mays literally ran a country mile, we all remember the catch. And of course, you see it every year, time and time again. And if you were to ask Mr. Mays, he'd tell you that was maybe his sixth or seventh best catch. He had more catches that were better than that, but that's the one they remember. But the old timers in the Negro League say, had that been Oscar Charleston, he'd have been waiting for that ball to come down.
He was that fast, right?
And the instincts were just uncanny. He
Yeah.
just seemed to know where that ball was coming down right off the crack of the bat. Yeah, but he did. He had great speed. He had great power. Buck says the strongest man he ever saw in his life. He says Charlie, as they called him, could take a baseball, put it between both palms, and turn the leather on the baseball. Just freakishly strong.
Again, great stories that you've heard and learned about. And you mentioned Willie Mays, and that he obviously passed away right before that game at Rickwood, but it seemed like a perfect fitting for him to be memorialized and talked about. It is that what you found out that week that you were there, that time that you were there, to hear those stories and hear again him elevated for what he did as well.
Yeah, in its own way, it did seem a little bit poetic
Mm,
that he had accomplished what he had hoped to do, and that was to bring us all together at the place that it started for him as a 17-year-old kid to celebrate not just him, but his other comrades of the Negro Leagues. And it was an epic celebration. I got to Birmingham the Tuesday before the games was played on that Thursday and was with his son Michael when the news came to Michael that his father had passed away. And they reached out to me to share that news and asked me to sit on it. So I sat on this for several hours, out of respect to his family.
sure.
And of course, you never want to lose a player the magnitude of Willie Mays. He's so important, not just for Major League Baseball history, but he also helps validate the talent that was there in the Negro League. So you don't want to lose a Willie Mays, even though he was 93 years old and he lived an amazing life. It still hurts when you lose someone who is so important to the Negro League family. But it's hard to be sad when you say the name Willie Mays because his name just elicits joy. This man never was booed in the opposing team's stadiums. That's how beloved he was. And you see these very vibrant images of him walking through the streets of Harlem, stopping to play stickball with the kids. Who does that? Willie Mays. And that's why he was so beloved. And I guess you could say his passing just days before that epic celebration gave us an opportunity to have a tremendous memorial service there in his honor and to have so many Negro League players there in attendance. And he was smiling down on us the entire time because he had accomplished what I think he had set out to accomplish.
Again, you're in Kansas City, Missouri, so I'm sure you have a lot of current Major League Baseball players come through there. What's it like with those guys come through, whether they're black, whether they're white, Hispanic,
Yeah.
whatever? What is that like for you to be with them and to see them react to the exhibits?
It's always special. It never gets old for me to have those young major league players come in, any athlete from any discipline, from that matter of fact. But if you're black and brown, and you play a team sport in this country, all roads lead back to the Negro Leagues. You don't play. There's no and if buts about it. You don't play. But you're right. It doesn't matter what color you are. And for me to be able to share the stories, because what they have in common with the players from the Negro Leagues, as I oftentimes share with them, is real simple: love of the game. You play this game because you love it. And sometimes, as I oftentimes say too, we as fans can get a little fickle because we equate everything in our society to money. Yeah, because they are afforded an opportunity to make a great living. We think that they don't love the game as much as the guys of yesteryear, but yes, they do, because they're still playing a game that they would have played for free. And if they had to play it for free, they would still be out on some sand lot somewhere playing baseball. But as I oftentimes share with them, you will never see a greater example of love of the game than you do when you walk through that museum. Mike, they had to love it in order to endure the things that they had to endure, not knowing where you could get something to eat, having to sleep on the bus. The bus became your sanctuary. It was your restaurant, it was your hotel. And yet they never allowed that set of social circumstances to kill their love of the game. And I think every athlete that walks through that museum, they understand how difficult our game is to play. Baseball might be the most difficult game of them all to play. And yet it's the game that we all think we can play because your physical stature doesn't dictate whether you can play this game. I can hear Buck in my ears right now. You could have two 80-year-old men sitting on a couch, and somebody hits a pop fly and they drop it, and the first words that come out of their mouth, I could have caught that. Because we all think we can play that game.
Yeah.
But if one of these great NBA stars misses a dunk, we ain't all saying that we can do that because most of us can't even miss a dunk. We can't get up that high. But baseball is that universal game that we all think we can play, but it may be the most difficult game of them all because really out of the major sports, it's the only game where you're on offense and you don't have the ball. So it is a very challenging game. And the obstacles that these athletes had to face made it even more challenging. And yet somehow they were able to play this game with great joy and play this game at its absolute highest level despite those obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the obstacles. Obviously, Reggie Jackson kind of went viral, I guess, if you will, talking about his obstacles when his playing days.
Yeah.
So again, these guys went through a lot just to be able to play. Not that you want to be negative, but that's part of it. Is that part of some of the discussions that you have as well with people about the challenges off the field, maybe that these guys dealt with?
Well, I go back to the stats being incorporated into the record books of Major League Baseball, and we knew there would be some pushback from a cross sector of those who just cannot accept that those players in the Negro Leagues were just as good as their white counterparts.
Yeah.
And so, guy writes me, and he says, "Well, this ain't about race. Well, when you start your sentence about that, then you already know it's probably about race. But he said, this is not about race. He says, I just want it to be apples to apples. And man, it took everything I had, Mike, not to cuss. Yeah, I didn't cuss. I maintained my decorum and I wrote him back. And I said, sir, this can never be apples to apples because no major leaguer ever had to endure
Mhm.
what these athletes had to endure. No major leaguer ever had to worry about where they could get something to eat or if they were going to have a place to sleep. No major leaguer had to worry about changing their uniforms underneath the bleachers of the ballpark that they were just about to go fill up because they couldn't use the facilities. No major leaguer had to worry about if their uniforms were going to be laundered because you couldn't wash your uniforms. And yet again, these athletes were able to play at such a high level. So, no, the athletes who perform there in the Negro Leagues, you actually need to give them more credence for what they had to overcome. So, no, it can never be apples to apples.
You talk about the past, you talk about the present. How about the future? It seems like, again, we've always seen it documented that the number of black players and athletes playing baseball continues to decrease. Why do you think that is? What are you guys doing, or maybe Major League Baseball players that you come across? What are they trying to do to change that trend?
Well, I tell you what, I am very proud, number one, of our partnership with Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball's Players Association, MLB, developed now, and that the programs that are being implemented are starting to have some positive reactions.
Mm.
Because I think we all understand that there's a problem. We've identified what the problem is. So we won't need to talk about the problem. Let's find a solution. And the fact that those baseball entities have embraced the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum with the understanding that this history can and will play a great role in getting more urban kids interested in baseball. Representation really does matter. You have to see yourself
Yeah.
in order to truly believe that you can do what you see them doing. And so our partnership is opening up this history to kids where they get to identify with themselves. But baseball is doing a wonderful job of making sure that we bridge the economic divide that has prevented a lot of urban kids from playing our game. Our game might went from a blue collar sport where it was played on the sandlots to essentially a country club pay to play kind of sport. And it is extraordinarily expensive. Everything about our sport is expensive, from the gear, the shoes, the bats, the gloves. You have to play on these travel teams, the league fees. And now the specialization. If you don't have a pitching coach and you don't have a hitting coach, well, you're going to fall behind. And so we've, in essence, priced out a lot of kids who just simply cannot afford that. And so thankfully, Major League Baseball and the Players Association, USA Baseball, MLB developed, they are all working in tandem to try and bridge that economic divide. We don't want a child to be hindered from playing this game because they can't afford to play this game. Now, if you don't like it, then you don't like it. But you should have every opportunity to play this game. And I'm excited about what I'm seeing. The one thing that we are not in our society, and that is patient. We are not patient. We live in what I call a microwave society. We want it right now. Well, it's going to take time and we have to stay the course. But we're starting to see results already. As we get more African American players in the minor leagues, you can start to project when the pendulum will shift
Hmm.
the other way. And I think those grassroots programs that are being supported by Major League Baseball, the structured programs that they have created. I just left Vero Beach, Florida, where they are working on the Hank Aaron Invitational, and there were well over 100 young African American Hispanic baseball players who were getting instruction from the best baseball minds in this game. The Jerry Manuels, the Marquise Grissams, Eric Davis, Ken Griffey Jr., all there lending their knowledge, sharing their knowledge with these young ball players. So we just need to stay the course. We'll see this pendulum shift the other way.
Yeah, as a dad of a former travel ball player, yes, I know the expenses. My bank account knows the expenses of playing this sport these days. Again, go back to the begging. I know one of the things you're trying to do right now is expand as well. How much of your begging is going toward that project?
Well, these milestone events that we've been talking about has made it a little bit easier to do the begging because, once you announce that you're going to build a new museum and it's going to cost you 25, $30 million, you can't sneak up on anybody. So when I call, they know why I'm calling. And so I guess if they let me in, that's a good sign. But I think that we have clearly substantiated why this history is so important, and it needs to be preserved. It needs to be celebrated. We need the expanded space to tell more stories, but we also want to utilize the life lessons that stem from this incredible story of triumph over adversity to hopefully inspire a future generation of young people simply to dare to dream, because that is what is at the crux of this incredible story of the Negro Leagues. These were strong willed, dedicated athletes who dared to dream of playing this game. And the Negro Leagues essentially fueled those dreams, hopes, and aspirations for those who knew that they could play this game and wanted to show everybody how good they were at this game.
Yeah, as you said, the core of it is it's the American dream. The American, what you want to do is to be successful in what you're doing. You've certainly been great and successful. Tell us the website. How can people find some more information, plan a visit, and be involved in what you're doing?
Well, we hope that everybody will come out to Kansas City to experience the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I'm obviously biased, but I think it's the best baseball history museum anywhere in the world. And that's with no disrespect to my friends at that hallowed hall known as the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But the story that we document, Mike, is so tremendously powerful. It is so tremendously inspirational. And and eye-opening for those who take that trek here to Kansas City to experience it. The common thread that I hear from the majority of our guests, I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Of course, you didn't know that. You had no way to know that. Yeah, it's not in the pages of American history books. So countless generations of us went through our own formal educations without knowing one of the most significant chapters, not in baseball history, but in American history. And so we encourage folks to make plans to visit us here in Kansas City, but you can always keep up with what's going on at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Visit us on the World Wide Web at nlbm.com. If you're so inclined, you can follow me on my social media platforms on X at NLBM on Instagram, that same username, NLBM Prez, to find out what's going on. We hope and encourage all of you to join our campaign, which is called Pitch for the Future. To help us build a brand new Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, you can go to the donation page, hit the drop down tab, and you'll see the Pitch for the Future campaign. And you can certainly make a contribution. There's no contribution too small. And of course, there's no contribution too large.
Well, I love it. I love it. Again, historian, the passion that you have, begging for things out there. You're the perfect fit for this museum and for the Negro Leagues and for the message out there. So I can't thank you enough for spending a little time with us. Like I said, every time I've seen you, it's nothing but passion and love for what you do, and that certainly that shows, and certainly that's why this museum and you've been very successful. So hopefully you continue to be so, and hopefully you're an executive director of that TV program, the TV show coming our way very soon as well.
I hope so too, Mike. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be on the show, man.
Again, great passion from Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. great history there. If you're in Kansas City, Missouri, certainly add that to your bucket list. A great place to visit. If he's around, certainly you'll hear a lot of great things, great stories from Bob Kendrick. We thank him for his time today. We also thank you for watching and listening to today's episode. And as always, invite you to like, to subscribe, and to join what we're doing. Great guests, great stories continue to come your way here on In the Front Row with Mike Vaccaro. For J.R. Quitman, our creator, producer, and director behind the scenes, I am Mike Vaccaro. We'll see you next time on another episode of In the Front Row with Mike Vaccaro. Have a great day, everybody.